Welcome all to this tutorial and to this chapter. In this chapter, I will be talking about users and user management. This is of utmost importance to you, primarily because if you plan to work as a network administrator, or if you're providing technical support or something of a kind, you will inevitably have to create users, delete users, lock them, unlock them, etc. You are bound to receive phone calls throughout the day or support requests that somebody has locked themselves out of their accounts, or that they can't log into their account, or that there is some sort of problem with the login. You will be required to solve such problems. Here I will teach you pretty much all that there is to know about users, their creation, deletion, setting password rules, not password rules, but passwords for the rules for expiration of passwords, and so on. As I said, please, if you are already here, pay close attention here, especially to this chapter, because you will need it in order to pass the Red Hat certified exam, certified system administrator exam, and you will need it if you plan to work as a network administrator. This is definitely one of those fields that will occupy a large chunk of your time in the real world. Anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into this tutorial and see what can we actually learn. So first off, let us have a look at the files where user information is stored. Now, you need to go into Etsy, so cat Etsy, and I will do the passwd file, press enter. There are a lot of users here. So not all of these users are the users with which you can actually log into the system. Rather, instead, they are system users. So for example, what shall we take? SSH daemon has its own user, which is through which it actually runs. They do not require passwords. They are just users for certain processes to run with a very specific set of permissions for security reasons. Anyway, let's go ahead and dive down into our user, which we are using currently, which I am using currently. Yours could be different. It is whatever you typed in during the installation. So mine is random guy. Let's go ahead and clear the screen. I mean, there is a lot of information there, and I would like to actually just view that user separately. So what have we learned before? With a grep command, just do the same thing as we did before, cat, and then pipe it to grep, or this should work too. Without the cat, you can do one single command, grep, what shall we grep, ran, and there we go. So you can put grep in front as well without piping it through. You can just pass a file to grep. Anyway, here I have pulled out this line. Didn't need to pull the entire username. Ran was enough. So here you have the username, which is random guy. This X signifies that there is a password, that there is a properly encrypted password in the etsyshadow file where all the passwords are stored for users. Notice that users are stored separately from their passwords. Passwords are in a different file which is encrypted and accessible to root. Over here, the next number, this number 1000 that you see, this is the UID, or unique user identifier. There are 65,000 or 64,000, if I'm not mistaken, possible users that you can create on one single system. So that's a lot. So feel free to create as many as you like. It is not very likely that you will encounter systems where you will need more where you will need thousands upon thousands and upon thousands of users, the systems which will require more than 64,000 users. That is not very likely, although it is possible. Next up is the unique identifier for groups, so GID, group identifier, also 1000. So by default, if you create a user in Red Hat Linux, and generally in Linux as well, that user will become a member of a group which is named the same way that user has been named. So random guy belongs to the group random guy. that is its default primary group. Every user within Red Hat has to be a member of at least one primary group. So you have primary groups and then you have secondary groups. We will cover this when we get to that section of this chapter. But for the time being, know that this first number, 1000, signifies the user ID, the UID, and that the second number signifies the GID. The GID tends to be different from the UID. I don't know, from time to time. Depends on what sort of a user have you created and to which groups have you assigned it. For example, let's say that a random guy is an accountant in some sort of a firm, any kind of a firm, let's say a butchery, and he is not a member of the group which is named by him. He's not a member of random guy. Rather, instead, he would be a member of accounting. So this would be 1000 and this would be some other number. So random guy with this UID would be a member of a group that is not random guy, rather instead that is accounting with a different GID. It might seem a little bit confusing, but no big deal. When I show you demonstrations later on, this will become a lot clearer. This is not an especially difficult chapter. It is, I would say, a rather easy chapter, but it does require you to pay a little bit attention and to follow through the demonstrations, and then you will be able to handle it. Anyway, next up you have the home directory of the user. So usually the home directory is just home and then the username, and after that come all those other folders that we are used to seeing. Depends on what you've assigned to be created by default. Next up is the default shell which that user runs, which is bin bash. There are multiple shells. I will also cover this in the follow-up tutorials within this particular chapter. Anyway, now that we have examined the Etsy password file, let's go ahead and clear the screen and do the same thing for etsyshadow, where our passwords are stored. But you will notice something. So grep ran etsyshadow. This file you will only be able to read as root. You won't be able to read it as another user, if my memory serves me right. Let's go ahead and check. No need to speculate at all. Etsyshadow, and there we go. Nobody has any permissions, but that only means that the root is the only one that can do anything to the file. You can see it's all just hyphens, minus signs. It's completely forbidden to access it. Okay, so let's go ahead and list it out as root, because you will only be able to do this as root. For shadow, for a Passwd, you should be able to do that as a regular user as well. Anyway, here you have the username, and then you have the password hash, which ends here. So at the first colon it ends, and the password hash is quite long. You will not be able to see the passwords in clear text. There is no way you can do that, especially not in Linux, and you can't do that in any operating system that I know. You won't be able to do it in Windows or Mac or anything of a kind. That is a unique feature across the board in pretty much all the major OSs out there. Password will be hashed, encrypted, and the file will be inaccessible. Only root will be able to access it, which is a pretty good security feature. I mean, let's say that somebody obtains a remote shell, or somebody plugs in a USB into your computer, they won't be able to grab the etsyshadow file, and even if they do somehow magically grab it, its contents will be encrypted, and it is highly unlikely that they will be able to decrypt it, especially if you've used a stronger password, let's say more than 8 characters long, and containing uppercase letters, lowercase letters, characters, numbers. Yeah, the amount of time that somebody would need and the sort of hardware that they would need in order to crack it goes outside of the rational sphere. I mean, it would take decades, even hundreds of years, depending on what sort of hardware you have, even more than that. Therewith, you can rest assured that your passwords are safe and secure when they are stored in this manner. Now these two files you should keep in mind. There is other information in the etsyshadow file, and there is other information which can be added to the Etsy Passwd file within the same line. That sort of information we will do later on. Like, for example, you can issue comments, you can assign additional programs to run instead of a in addition to the, not only instead but also in addition to the bash shell or something of a kind. There's lots of options that you can add here that are not all listed. Now you might have noticed that there are some other things past the hash. We will deal with them in the follow-up tutorials as well. No worries there. These are some of the things that you will be setting, like the expiration date of a password, or do you want to lock it, disable it, or to do or something of a kind. Here in the Etsy and Passwd file, especially in the etsyshadow file, you will be able to see, I meant to say etsyshadow, not just Etsy. You will be able to see whether the password for that account has been locked out or deactivated, or does it have an expiration date, or something of a kind. Whatever is needed by you at the moment, you will be able to find that sort of information in regard to your users in etsyshadow and Etsy Passwd files. Anyway, you can also list these two by doing this. Let's just do this before I decide to wrap up the tutorial. Grep Etsy Passwd. This is not gonna work. We'll have to do it in a different way. So cat Etsy shadow grep. What shall we grep? Run and end cat Etsy Passwd grep run. There we go. Now we have both of these things listed out here without any problems. We can actually see both of them, and we see the information that is contained within the Etsy and within the Etsy password and within the Etsy shadow file. Usually that's the first place where you will look if the user is having any problems or any difficulties logging in. Anyway, I bid you all farewell and a ton load of luck until next tutorial.